the Democracy Nerd. We're continuing with our exploration in how technology might impact and will impact the upcoming elections, how it has impacted in the past. It might be possible to install an app on your phone to make democracy and elections and voting fun or more doable. Is there an app for that? Yeah, we'll be talking about concerns of generative AI and other conversations with deep fake videos of candidates saying wacky stuff, the spread of misinformation, the manipulation of voters, multiple downsides, multiple risks that we should explore, any upsides. We also think about players within the technology space merely trying to extract value from democracy to add capital. Are there folks out there who are trying to use their resources and use their expertise and technological tools to put value back in to democracy? We're going to talk to one of those people who might be that right now. Sara Gifford, Chief Operating Officer, co-founder of ActiVote. Let's start by introducing her and understanding what the heck ActiVote is. Sara Gifford, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Do you want to start with your story first or the ActiVote story first?
How about the ActiVote story?
Tell us the story.
To kick things off. So we started ActiVote in 2019. So in that sense, we're still a bit of a baby and growing up. But we knew we wanted to do something good. We knew we wanted to try to help democracy, help citizens, help people feel more engaged and more empowered. Because at this time, I'm sure I don't have to tell you, there's a lot of people who feel disgust with politics, certainly not engaged, certainly not positive about it. When we looked at the space and we did some research, the question, why aren't people voting? Why do people not feel, engaged in all of this? And a lot of it came down to education. People don't know when elections are. People don't know what candidates stand for. They certainly hear the, one-liner on TV or the angry tweet on Twitter. But are they actually going to act on the issues that I care about? Are they going to implement policies that I think are going to help? And all of those types of questions. And, there's a lot of research that shows if you're informed, you're confident, you're more likely to do something. At the end of the day, voting is voluntary. Voting is something that we can all choose to do or choose not to do. I, for one, hope we all choose to do it. But we looked at this space and we said, hey, what we need is voter education. And we need to make education fun. We need to make education simple. We need to make education habit forming. All of those things kind of put together. Why did we make an app? It's because it's what we're good at. The three of us that are doing this are all tech people. That's where our education is. That's where, our knowledge is. And you use the skills you have, and that's the skill we had. Now, we tried to take a lot of research out there. And I think much to your intro that you just had, tech is already influencing elections. If you look at the political ads on Facebook or Twitter or Google, that's already influencing voters. So we know tech is out there doing it. We wanted kind of tech for good. And that's kind of where ActiVote came in. So what ActiVote is a platform. It's only for voters. We're not here for candidates. We're not here for campaigns. We're here for voters to feel informed and feel confident and to make things easy for them to kind of to achieve that and hopefully a little bit of fun along the way.
So I've downloaded the ActiVote app on my phone. And one of the first things it asks you to do is take the quiz. Explain the quiz and why you start with, and that's not the only thing you could pick on the front page. I think there's a couple options, but why do you want to start with a quiz?
So the reason we start with a quiz is to make this app about the voter. At the end of the day, what are public servants doing when they sit in office? Public servants are passing policies that impact our life. They're doing it at the local level, they're doing it at the state level, they're doing it at the federal level. And who we vote for, we should be voting for people that we feel like best represent us and represent the policies that we believe in. So what the quiz does is the quiz does two things. One, and we have about 500 different quiz questions. Don't worry, for those listening, you do not have to answer 500 questions. We start with, I think, 4 or 6 just to start, so very small sampling. But the idea is learn just a little bit about what these policies are and how they impact your life. In those policies, we feel very strongly about lowering the temperature in our political discourse. So we do not ask yes/no questions. We don't ask for or against questions because those are inherently polarizing. The moment I can be in only one of 2 buckets makes somebody else the other. And that is not our goal. So all of our policy questions have 5 answers across the political spectrum because there is nuance to politics. They aren't all yes, no questions. They aren't all just the extremes. There's quite a bit of nuance. But what that quiz then does is it plots you in this matrix. So you get to see a 2D grid. And on that grid, you can see national figures, people running for president. But we spent a lot of time also getting local politicians and local candidates running to represent you in that grid. And the answer the simple question, who believes what I believe? If you know who shares your values, you're more likely to vote. There's a lot of research that shows that people show up to vote for or against something, but they show up when they feel a connection to that vote that they're making. And so that quiz is a link to learning about policy. It is a link to that matrix that shows who believes what I believe. And it's the first step on your civic journey.
All right, I actually want to go through it. And the second question that came up was about abortion. That came up for me. Are they randomly generated, or are there certain questions that are weighted and more people get, or some questions that all people get?
There's some questions all people get, and then there's some questions that are weighted along the way.
Got it. I'm wondering if abortion or women's right to choose is one of those that lots or everybody gets, and it's a window into your samples, who's downloading this thing and entering the question. And I found it pretty interesting. Before I did it, I would have assumed, and I'm going to just explain my bias. And it's a bias that I want to explore. And I don't just explore my bias. I mean, use my bias to shoot at what you're doing. All right. So but acknowledge my bias. My bias is the following. My challenging hypothesis, my fear is the following: that the people who will download a democracy app care about democracy. That we need to make our democracy work, get more people to care about democracy, not only additionally empower those who already do. And in fact, and that's not much of a critique, well, fine, it'll still help the people who care about democracy, and it's a different thing. But maybe what I really want to do is, with the people who already care about democracy, I want to push them into action, not only information. I want to get them to do stuff to encourage the other people to care. And by the way, for me, I actually want to get them to care not only neutrally, but actually care about humanity, care about the future, care about how do we do things better together, which is a little ecumenical, but nonetheless has some biases. All right, so that's my bias. And so I remember Project Vote Smart, and Project Vote Smart's project was to get candidates to fill out a questionnaire so you knew exactly where they were. And the challenge, in my view, that Project Vote Smart had to do, well, I know this was true, is that candidates get advised not to fill it out because not enough people read it. It wouldn't actually generate positive votes, but it would give easy fodder and proof for any negative hit piece on something that you would say, this person disagrees on this, you should vote against them. And you can do micro-targeting based on granular answers that the candidates had done. So I might want to talk about that, but that's not this point. What I was interested in with this question is that, based on my biases, people who value democracy, et cetera, and my own view of the current Republican Party, I would have assumed that your sample in who uses ActiVote skewed lefty, not left, but, skewed urban, skewed tech savvy, skewed not Fox News viewer, not red MAGA hat wearer, right? That's what I have thought. What I find interesting, I do want to ask you, there will be a question here somewhere. I do want to ask you who the people are that use this, but what's interesting to me is that I get these 5 choices between: they should be illegal in all cases, abortions; they should be illegal except in extreme circumstances; the middle one, they should be legal, but only until the pregnancy reaches a certain duration; they should be legal in most circumstances, but some regulations surrounding logistics and time frame of the process should be allowed; but they should be legal in all cases. Now, people could quibble with exactly the characterizations. I'm sure that's a lot of choice making you have to do. But what's interesting to me is the first 2 choices and the last 2 choices. Okay, and I hesitate to call extreme, but just for limiting within this question. So the two non-middle choices add up to precisely the same percentage. That the illegal in all cases 13, illegal except in extreme circumstances, that's 28. That adds up to 41 if my arithmetic is correct. The 2 on the other side, they should be legal in all cases, 23, legal in most circumstances, 18. I believe that also adds up to 41. So based on this, and maybe that's why you include that, maybe you included all of them. What does this tell you? And this is not an abortion question. This is an app question. Tell us about your audience. How many of these people are there? How many people are downloading it? And what do you know about them?
Yeah, so I mean, and this is a great example. So one of the things that that question tells you is America is divided on this issue, right? So the first thing that question tells you is that we don't have a consensus on what exactly the answer is, and that's why it gets a lot of press and a lot of attention. So that's one thing. If you look at, to answer your question,
And actually, I do want to respond. That is a takeaway, right? There, because all five options get meaningful answers, right? It's not like, oh, almost everybody's clumped in one area. All five options. The smallest one, to be clear, though, is illegal in all cases, and the people who are leading the movement for the current Supreme Court are in that 13%. So I at least need to say this to my pro-choice friends out there. But you keep going.
yeah, no, and that's a fair point, and you know that's I think you're right. That 13% is currently maybe driving more policy than the other 80+%, right, that we look at. But if you look at who's using it, I think to your question, we have hundreds of thousands of people that have used it so far, and it's growing every year. Obviously, even years we grow more than in odd years, but we grow every year. If you look at who's using it, we know a little bit about those folks. They are from all over the political spectrum. So we do have quite a few. We have a lot of conservatives. We have a lot of liberals. We have a lot of everybody, right? And you can see that, from that abortion answer, to be clear. Now, if you look, there are other questions. Sorry, let me say one more thing about who's using it. I will say we skew a little bit young in the sense that if you look at the best voters tend to be 70 plus.
Yeah.
Most ActiVote users are less than 70. So when I say we skew younger, I'm not talking 18 to 22-year-olds.
Yeah.
But we have a very low 70 plus demographic currently using our.
And another reason, by the way, that it is that the results on the and by the way, do you compare these? And forgive my interruption, but you compare because it's almost like you're providing an instant polling service for somebody who's thinking about where the world, what the United States, if your sample is representative. Do you compare the answers to yours with precisely similarly worded, or at least somewhat similarly worded questions from Pew or Reuters or whomever else?
Yeah, so we publish polls every once in a while about different topics. We published a poll at some point about the minimum wage, right? As an example, that's another one of the questions that folks get pretty early on in that journey. And basically what that poll said was, hey, the country's not behind 15, they're not behind 7, they're probably behind 10, $11, right? Something in the middle. And so they're for a change to the minimum wage, but they're not for 15, right? From a big perspective. And so we do sometimes publish polls, and we'll check those against what other pollsters are saying, right? And we do end up with a pretty representative sample. We weigh those samples to make sure, right? So since we have less older, we will weigh accordingly. But we do sometimes publish polls about those things. And, there are questions where there's actually amazing alignment. So we have a question somewhere in the app about veteran homelessness. And should the government help solve the veteran homeless crisis? And the answer is an overwhelming yes from everybody. That is a very bipartisan position. Democrats, Republicans, independents, libertarians, everybody thinks we should help our veterans. And so even on those questions where there's very, very little differentiation, you learn something there too.
So you create that. Well, I want to still dig in. So you're it sounds relatively politically representative, skew a little bit younger. Say more about geography or what you understand about the hundreds of thousands of people who use this, or how many people. Yeah, say more about your user base.
Yeah, so if you look geographically, we're pretty well split with the country. So if you look at the number of users per state, and then you look at the size of the state, we have more California users than anybody else because California is the biggest state, right? And then Texas, New York, Florida, et cetera. We have very few users in Wyoming and North Dakota, again, for population, but we have a pretty representative sample when you gauge according to population, right, of those states. So we have users all over. One of the ways that we have those users all over, we focus very, very heavily on local elections. So if you look, it's currently fall of 2023. We have something like 60,000 candidates in our app right now who are running in November. Because for some of you listening, there's an election in November. Some of you listening maybe don't have an election in November, but a lot of people have an election coming this November, and we want to make sure we cover those. And that gives us a lot of access into those local communities that sometimes have those off-cycle elections.
Once I got through the survey, it puts you on a political matrix and you get to compare yourself with national politicians. But then right after that comes up a screen that's basically saying all politics is local, right? That's not the line you use. And then it gets to, and it keeps on, it keeps on going until you have to register, and then you got to and then you got to put yourself in there. The advantage of getting what happens after the survey, sort of what's the hope? And I do have a few thoughts about and questions about what you plan on doing with this data, because it seems like you're building maybe a really interesting data set. But what happens after that? You do the survey, you enter voter registration information, and then what does the participant get out of being a part of ActiVote or using ActiVote?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Once you finish the survey, we do say something along the lines of all politics is local, because the national figures that sit in that grid, everybody knows their faces, everybody knows their names, but they aren't necessarily making decisions that impact each of us each and every day. And so when you put in your address, we can look up your local election. So we can figure out that you vote for, school board region 3 coming up in November, or, town ward 6 coming up. And so we show you those local elections. So when are they, who is on the ballot, all of that. So the first thing you get by putting in your address is you'll get those local elections, and it can be incredibly personalized to exactly where you live. The second thing you get by being part of ActiVote is we will bring 2 or 3 minute little action each day, right? So I think to your question about how do you get people to do more, ActiVote, our goal is to build this habit of tiny civic engagement. And so every day you get a 2 or 3 minute action, and it could be a policy question, like the abortion question we just talked about. It could be preparing for an election. Hey, town council is up. Here's the 7 people. What do you think? It could be an approval rating for the president, or an approval rating for your, county recorder. It could be about legislation, but you get a small kind of action. And the idea of those actions is that you come back once a day. You do your 2 or 3 minute action. You can do that, while you're waiting to pick up your kids from school, waiting in line at the grocery store. But the good news is we're going to engage you every day, because democracy is here every day. What happens a lot right now, and if you're anything like me, I do have an election this November. And so my phone, I'm getting text messages, I'm getting phone calls. My mailbox is filled with flyers from all of the candidates that want my vote this November. And I will not hear a peep from them until the next time they run 4 years from now. These are all local candidates in my case, because I have a local election coming up. I will hear nothing from them. When we look at democracy right now, how does that make voters feel good? How does it feel good to be used, right? To get the phone calls, to get the text messages, and they ask for money on top of your vote. But they're certainly asking for your vote. You go do something and then you're ignored. And we want it to be exactly the opposite. We want it to be here every single day. So yes, we want you to vote. And on that election day, we want you to go cast that vote. But then the day after, we still want you engaged. We still want you to know what's happening in your city, what's happening in your county, what's happening in your state. And I think to your question earlier, one of the things we try to do is, as people get more engaged with those daily actions, we try to make them slightly bigger, right? And so how do you take someone that might be comfortable doing a daily action on their phone, and how do you grow them into a more engaged citizen? Well, you don't start by saying, hey, you should run for office. You start by saying, hey, here's a form online, and you can actually send a note to your member of Congress or a note to your state rep. It's something they can still do in private. They can still, feel comfortable. They can spend time, doing it and, feel good about it. You give them the baby steps, right, that grow into those things. A lot of times, once people say, hey, you're a good voter, the next step is, go lobby at the state house, go plan a march, in the local park, and go run for office. And those are really big steps. And we're focused on how do you take these smaller steps to get people more engaged. So that's what you're going to get when you sign up for it.
So after I've entered my personal information, it then told me, as you said, it told me all the elections that are going to be happening in my area. Okay. Which meant it was able to match it to voter registration records. How did you arrange that? What were the technical challenges or the regulatory challenges in making that happen?
Yeah. So as some people may or may not know, voter registration data is public record. So states make public their voter file. And in that voter file, it does not say who you voted for. So nowhere does it document, who you cast your ballot for, but it says, who you are and if you vote or not. So it will say that you're a primary voter, you're a, only vote in, November of presidential years and whatnot. And so that's all kind of in those public voter rolls. And so we get those voter rolls, and that allows us to do a couple of things. So one, it allows us to check, hey, are you registered? But it also allows us to check, hey, have you been purged from the voter rolls, so we can give you a notification if you are. Because if you've been purged and you don't know it, you might need to contact your state and get that fixed. So that's one thing it allows us to do. It also allows us to check, your voting behavior. Are you a perfect super voter, or are you an intermittent voter? And what that allows us to do is kind of make, our goal is to take folks, if you vote every 4 years for president. We want you to start voting every 2 years. So November for the midterms and November for president. And if you're one of those voters, we want you to start voting in primaries in even years. And if you're one of those voters, we want you to start voting in local. So again, it's all about the one baby step kind of towards being a better voter. And so that's one of the things the voter files do. That's about challenges. There's a lot of Americans. That's a lot of data that we have to search through when we look for this. And it's also very, very
You just do like a FOIA request, or you just plug something in and use sort of a download stick and then take it out, like, you know, like a spy movie. Like what do you like actually, how do you connect all the data?
So each state is different.
Yeah.
So for some states, it's that you can go and download this on a website, which I'm sure for some folks online, that's making them pretty freaked out at the moment. For other states, you have to apply for access to the file. So it's, you know, it's different in every single state.
Yeah.
But they make that data available. So that's one. But one of the challenges we have with that is, like, we actually take the fact that we have that data very seriously, and we take the security around that data very seriously. This is people's personal information, not just the voter file data that we get, but also the data you put into our app. That data is yours. That personal data is yours. That is not ours. You know, we don't want, so we take security very seriously, make sure nobody can hack into us and steal it. But we also take your privacy very, very, very seriously, and we don't share that data with anyone. So what we do sometimes, and Jefferson, what you just said, you could see that in the abortion poll, 13% of people think that. Well, that's aggregated data. That's not sharing anyone's personal data, right? That's over hundreds of thousands of people. We do sometimes publish a poll that says, you know, a plurality of Americans would like a minimum wage of $11. But again, that's aggregated data and it's not personalized. So we take that very, very seriously. So I think one of the things, to answer your question, is one of the challenges is we will always ring true to our privacy and kind of voter focus and security focus around any of the data that we have.
So so since you have voter registration data, you know the political party registration of the people who've entered your system. How does that break down? And forgive me if that's a repeat, but how does that break down relative to the country at large?
So we have, if I do kind of high level numbers, we have about 40% Democrats, 30% Republicans, and 30% independents. So we do skew a touch liberal. I think you pointed that out a little bit earlier. But we have a pretty good
Not much.
Yep. And I will say one thing is party data is also not perfect. Take the state of West Virginia as an example. According to the voter rolls, West Virginia is predominantly Democrat. If anybody follows the news, they know West Virginia is a pretty red state. And
political parties are lagging indicators.
Sorry?
Political party membership is a lagging indicator.
Exactly. So when I give you those stats, it's what we know. I don't know anything different, but it's not always perfect.
Yeah. So another white people, I would enter with a hypothesis that this skews white. Am I wrong? Maybe you don't know.
Our data on demographics isn't as strong, and we don't ask that question. The data that we do have, though, you know, America is about 13% African American. We've got about 10% African American users. So I think we are short on the Latino part, and in part because our app is not yet in Spanish, although that is something we plan to do one of these days. So in terms of kind of different ethnic groups, I think language groups are the area where we haven't cracked yet because we're still single language at the moment.
Have you been able now to track, and you say moving, and I think there's a helpful lesson for democracy nerds out there of trying to move people up one step, right? Move people, and even in persuasion, right? If you try to fundamentally remove someone from a cult and move them into something else, that's pretty hard to do. Very often it could just ingrain them further. But if you try to move them one step, right? A little bit of a nudge, that tends to, you know, Kahneman Tversky would say that works a little bit better. So that's a helpful takeaway. Have you been able to track nudges you've done? Have you seen the increase in voting behavior among your community? And are you able then to, have you done any sort of controls to see how much that is based on stuff you are doing within it, or if potentially downloading the app was just the beginning of a journey that person might take either way? What have you seen in terms of sort of behavior change?
Hey, that's a great question. And we do actually measure that. And so we know what your voting behavior was before you got ActiVote. We know when you got ActiVote, and then we can see your voting behavior afterwards. And what we've seen is, especially take that cohort of, we call them like the 50-50 voters. They vote between 1% and 50% of the time. They have voted before, which means we know they know how to do it. but they're incredibly infrequent. In that cohort of infrequent voters, because that's who we target, that's who we built this for, is those people that probably need the most help. We increase their chances of voting by 33%.
Wow.
33% between those elections. And we can see it in the data. So one of the things the app does is send you email reminders. So you might not have come back to the app for 6 months. But if you live in Virginia, today you got an email saying, hey, early voting's about to start for the election. If you live in Virginia, here's how you find the sites to vote early. Here's how you look up your ballot. And hey, you should probably go vote. And so we will see people who haven't touched our app since the Virginia June election. And then they come back then, they plan their vote, and then they go vote. And so we can see that in the data. Now, you ask a really good question, kind of causation versus correlation. Is the app solely responsible for that change in behavior, or was it the start of a journey? Or did somebody else tell them and then somebody else started the journey, by telling them to get the app in the first place? I wish I could take all credit for it. I probably can't. There may be outside factors we just don't know, and it's just not something we can measure. So I will be honest that I don't know that I can take full credit, although we're still proud of it, even if we can't be full credit.
Yeah. Even what you're doing is rooting on the people who are doing personal journeys. That's democracy too. So
absolutely.
So as you think about let me just jump to the hard parts. You said managing the data. Another hard part is got to be dough. The good news is your 3 co-founders were all successful sort of tech folks who are all doing a deeply irrational thing by doing this. And by deeply irrational, I mean, absolutely you should be doing it. More people should be doing that kind of stuff. It's why we have these conversations, frankly. Feel free to dig into that one or take another, bite a different way. What are the hard parts? What's the biggest thing that you have to navigate?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're alluding to is the 3 of us are paying for this entirely ourselves. So we are spending our retirement, donating our time, donating all of our money to make this happen. I shouldn't say all of our money. We pay our rent and do all those things too. But yeah, we're donating this. This is our kind of civic service that we want to be doing kind of for this space. What are the hard parts? There's a number of big items. So one is, if you're going to play in this game of politics and elections and democracy, you're going to get a lot of people that say nasty things. On any given day, I'll open up the ActiVote inbox and there's emails calling me, a fascist and a communist. And there's emails saying nasty things that, we're trying to, mess with elections, where, any number of bad things. So one of the hard things is just sometimes people say mean things. And you have to have pretty thick skin, and you have to just remember, I'm doing this for all the right reasons. They're wrong, and I'm just going to keep doing it. So that's one thing. I think the other thing that's kind of a two-sided coin, kind of what's hard, but what's also really rewarding is, as I said before, we really focus on reaching voters, those infrequent voters. Campaigns are not reaching out to them, right? They don't get asked, and everybody likes to be asked to the dance. Everyone likes to be asked for their vote. That actually does feel good, right? Someone wants something from me, and you feel a little bit of power in that moment. And we're trying to make sure that kind of all those infrequent voters that campaigns aren't targeting are getting targeted by us. Now, they're hard to reach. That's kind of one part of it. We frequently hear things like, my vote doesn't count, and like the system isn't here for me. And you hear some sentiments that are pervasive around here. And I don't judge those sentiments at all, but they're hard to hear. Now, the positive side of that coin is when you can talk to these people and you can help them, engage better in the process, and they feel a new sense of empowerment. Well, that's the flip side of that coin that makes the effort all worth it.
Other hard parts, keeping, and it doesn't have to be, instead of other hard parts, what's the dream for this medium term? We could say long term, right? We could say after, how do you ensure you don't get tired, right? How do you, when you get, and by the way, there is the professional political consulting and even nonprofit class has a set of biases, and those biases are usually adjacent to their very reasonable financial self-interest. Usually, particularly in the nonprofit class, they're not making a ton of money. They want to make sure donors are actually giving money, that people are actually paid a wage, that they can pay rent, or heck, even maybe a mortgage by doing that work. right? I am not even close, although I've been a nonprofiteer for much of my career, I am not even close to a fundamentalist on this score. In fact, when I do the arithmetic of how democracy is going to work, I think it has to include a healthy dose of either systemized or non-systematic benevolent irrationality. I don't see rational utility maximization solving for every collective problem. That's just not how I think the world works. That's maybe why this court sits. So I will say that. And I still think, no, maybe even because of that, I find sustainability questions, I don't mean environmental, although those are cool too, sustainability questions particularly fascinating. How do you build a purpose-driven entity that is doing wonderful things, that doesn't end up getting sold to a PE firm, a private equity firm, to be harvested from its data? It's cool if that's what the PE firm is doing and that's what the company is born to do, but we don't only want to sell democracy to the highest bidder. That's not fully the point. So, and I know that's why you're doing this. So how are you thinking about building this to be able to fulfill its promise, to get scale, and to live past the much appreciated benevolent irrationality of the founders?
Hey, so that's a lot in there and a lot of the questions, but a couple of things. So first, if you'll allow me, like when I dream about what this could be someday, and I always think like, what's the big goal far in the future, right? That we're all working towards. When I think about that, I say, okay, imagine that 200 million registered Americans have ActiVote. They're getting the voting reminders. They're showing up to the election, to all of their elections. Voter participation, instead of being 66% in 2020, and we all celebrated, is 95% in every election, including primary local elections, right? Imagine that world. And talk about what a representative democracy looks like when 95% of people vote, right? I would call that a heck of a lot more representative if you ask me. And then imagine that every city council, every town council says, okay, we need to make a decision about a bike lane, or we need to make a decision about the local park. And they put up a quick question to the community in ActiVote and say, hey, we need to do this to fix the park or to make a new playground. Are you for or are you against? Or do you want this, or this? And they give you the options. And then in City Hall is the answer from the public. Imagine that. Imagine the answer from the public, right, of a poll that was put up for 3 days before every vote happening in the city, with that information. Who wouldn't want to go in and once a day say, okay, yep, I want this for the park. I don't want that for the school. I do want this for the state. I do want that for the federal, and know that their voice is heard. Think about how empowering that is, right? Think about the different perspective we would have if everybody could have that impact and their voice was just everywhere all the time. Because I do think elected officials, I know, when I say elected officials, everyone immediately thinks of Trump and Biden, right? They immediately think of Matt Gaetz and AOC. What you should be thinking about is the person that's probably either working for free or for a few $1,000s a year, right? And they're trying to figure out, what meals to serve at school, right? Or how to fix the potholes on your road, right? Those people would love to know what their constituents think and love to have access to a tool, that can make that happen. And so when I dream big, that's what I dream. And I'm sure there's folks laughing at me right now, but that's okay. I'm still gonna keep dreaming. Now I think to your second question, how do we make sure that happens? We are not planning to give this, to PE firm to steal the data and to exploit people's opinions even more. I think when we think about, how could this sustain, if I ever got tired, because it is possible that happens someday. Although I would argue that's, decades away. We can have this sentiment of the people. Imagine that any person who wants to run for office could get polling on their race, right, about how we're doing. And imagine that instead of it costing, $40,000 for a single point in time poll, and those are real numbers, by the way, right? If you're running for Congress and you want to run a poll in your district, it might be $40,000. Now imagine you're running for school board and we say, hey, for $1 a week, you can have live polling from ActiVote, right? Because you're running for school board and your entire budget is only $1,000, right? You're paying this out of pocket and you're just a great public servant. Well, there's 500,000 people that run for office every year, right? $1 a week, that can sustain ActiVote for a little while. Imagine you're a community that wants to put that up and wants to ask their residents about things. Pay me $1 a week, right? Well, There's another few 100,000 municipalities around, the country, right? They could do that. And so for very, very, very small amounts, because it would never be about making money. It's not what it's about. It would be about, creating a public service and creating something better. For very, very, very small sums over the vast amount that is American democracy, you could keep this going forever, and provide an amazing service along the way.
I do want to get back to that. It does seem to me there are a couple of key foundational formation choices you made. One, which you sort of answered, at least in part, is why you decided to be nonpartisan, right? Why you decided, instead of working on an issue or a particular power set or a clump of issues that you are passionate about or the co-founders are passionate about, you say, no, let's just get an informed electorate and get people into the mix and see what happens. I am interested in that decision. Well, let me not this time do a compound question. Answer that one.
So here's the thing. I want everyone to vote. I get to vote my values, and I've got a whole set of values, and I will vote that way. But I want everybody voting their values. And one of the reasons that I find that kind of the most important issue, I don't have all the answers. So I have opinions. I have a lot of opinions on a lot of things, and I have a lot of ideas about the right or wrong way or the best solution for America's problems. But who says I'm right? It could be somebody else who's right. And so I want them voting as much as I'm voting, because I do believe in like the collective electorate and the collective intelligence about what things are. And that's not just me. And so that's why we want it to be nonpartisan, because I do think everybody, should vote. I think one of the, most kind of, if you look at direct democracy, think about ballot measures, right? It's sometimes in states you actually get to vote on a very, very specific issue, and the results are almost always pretty clear about what people think. And I trust in that kind of general electorate. Ohio had a ballot measure recently about changing their state constitution, and the answer was pretty clear, right? They wanted to keep the power in the hands of the people. And so I'm with those Ohio voters, and that's what ActiVote is here for. And that means I don't want it to be in the power of half the people. I want it to be in the power of all the people.
If you, in therapy otherwise, dug into a little bit why you give a damn, like why democracy itself became a core enough value for you, you're dedicating a meaningful part of your life to it.
So there are two answers to that question. So one of them, I went to vote with my parents. My parents voting where I grew up was in our elementary school, in the gym of the elementary school. So as a kid, no gym class that day, which is pretty devastating when you're 5 years old, right? But my parents took us, and I remember, sobbing one year. And I don't know if I remember this, or your parents tell you the story often enough that you think you remember it. So we'll I don't know which one it is, but me just crying and crying and crying because I was going to be late to school, and my parents being like, "Hey, sometimes there's a good reason to be late to school, and voting is it, right? And this is what it is. You'll go to school when mom and dad go to work, and that's when we're done voting." And so I think that's one part. I think the second part, one of my co-founders, he was originally Dutch, grew up in the Netherlands. And his dad still remembered being liberated from the Nazis by the Americans. So had a very, very strong appreciation for America in all of this. And so my co-founder, his dad, they used to wake them up at 3 o'clock in the morning to watch presidential debates, he and his sisters, because this is important, right? And so, he would wake up early in the morning. When he was a teenager, his dad took him to meet the new U.S. ambassador for the Netherlands, and he still remembers this. So he's somewhere in the Netherlands, in some presentation. And this U.S. ambassador, what he said was, "I spent the first third of my life getting a wonderful public education. I spent the next third of my life leveraging all of the institutions and infrastructure that America builds for us. And so therefore, I'm going to spend my last third of my life in public service." And here's this teenage Dutch boy who still remembers that today. And when he told me that story, I realized, I went to public school. I got a wonderful public education. I spent the next part of my life also benefiting from everything America does, right? So my career, I didn't do it by myself. The company didn't do it by themselves. Like every time you get on a plane that the FAA helps you land, every time you drive on a road that the DOT helps build, right? You're utilizing all of these things in America. And so this is my version of public service. I don't have the personality to run for office for lots of reasons. And I'm probably not rich enough to be an ambassador. So public service is ActiVote, right? We can build something that is that. And I think, it's good to remember sometimes everything you've got, as you're giving something along the way.
Two things I want to pull out. One, Democracy is humility. What I heard you say is that ultimately, if we are committed to a decision-making system where everybody gets to weigh in, we are either at our root, or at least upon negotiated agreement, engaging in an exercise of a shared understanding of humility, either from our own humility, or at least because we're willing to throw up our hands and say, well, if you're willing to be humble, so will I. Another thing I heard you say was family. And also to our democracy nerds out there, I don't ask this question all the time, and maybe I should. I'm guessing if I did, there would always be a story like that. I'm guessing, I know it is for me, right? Most of the people I know, sometimes people have maybe a later problem, a later hassle, right? Somebody goes into, and well, I know it would not be for everybody. I know we've talked to people, formerly incarcerated, for instance, who then got confronted by the law and realized they need to do something about it and got to it late in life. But I didn't ask the question about, well, was there something when you were 7 years old that made you even think that that was something you could possibly do? But I do think it is a lesson that as we engage our own family members in stuff, that may have ripples we don't even anticipate a generation and a half away. You said that, well, you made another choice. You made another formational choice, which was to be, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you formed as a B Corp. I think you formed as a B Corp instead of as a C Corp, or as it was a typical corporation. B corporation, sort of like a benefit corporation, or instead of as a 501c3 charity, or instead of as a 501c4 kind of political nonprofit. How come that organizational formation choice?
Yeah, so a couple things. So one thing that was very important for us is that we are mission driven, and the decisions we make, we wanted to be obligated that the decisions we make are for that mission, and that mission is for voters, right? So they are the thing we think about when we make every feature choice, when we make every marketing choice, when we make every choice is about voters. And so we wanted to be kind of, legally connected to that mission. Then the question is, why be a B Corp versus be a nonprofit? Well, we weren't accepting donations, and we didn't want to accept donations. We wanted this to be something that we gave back. And one of the amazing things about nonprofits is it allows you to easily accept donations. It allows the people to deduct that from their taxes. It's an absolutely wonderful structure. But given we didn't want donations, we didn't need that structure. And so, but we still wanted that nonpartisan, and mission focused requirement on us.
The thing that I come back to, have you and your co-founders considered, and I know you responded to this, but I don't think you yet answered it, at how you think about a next generation of leadership. Now, just pause for a second. You have said it's mission driven. You have said our purpose is not to sell to a private equity firm. I understand. I have dear, people I dearly admire. If I call them dear friends, that implicates them. If I just say I admire, that only implicates me. Who have started purpose-driven companies, and then they get older, and they've got to figure out what to do, and both of them, and they thought, well, could I sell it to my employees? Well, it turned out they weren't really in a position in the companies they started really to do that, right? They didn't have a set of employees that could sort of figure it out, get to the financing together, and sort of do that thing. They were decidedly commercial kind of business. They were not nonprofits. And so they sold, and I wouldn't say they sold to the highest bidder. They sold to something that they would feel decent about the press release, but they didn't sell to themselves. They didn't sell to the same kind of person they are. They sold to larger organizations. Larger organizations, the organizations can afford to buy smaller organizations. And so maybe by being a B Corp, you can insert into the organizational mission, right? Some of that stuff. Other mechanisms that you're putting in place to all three of you get hit by a truck, and there's a community ready for ActiVote to continue to flourish, and somebody comes along and says, listen, this could be such a valuable polling tool. We're going to start using this to poll lots of folks. We can do representative polls just by knowing everybody's personal data. We're going to harvest more data, do more polls, make more money. We're going to come up with other ways. Maybe we're going to do some things. We're going to do through ads. We're going to do really targeted ads in really local areas where we could be the best game in town to actually turn some elections. Maybe we will sell some space, even so do some content marketing. Not only we put out content, but we allow content to get to our folks. Maybe we take some money for that. Any number of ways we can imagine monetizing this, all of which you would oppose now, but someday both you and I will no longer live. What happens then, or what systems we put in place to imagine that?
Hey, I mean, if you look back to when I talked about long-term vision, right, and I dream about the 200 million people, right, it is selling polls for $1 a week, right? It is selling to municipalities for a few bucks a week so they can put it up in there. So there is a world in which, as we keep growing and as the thing that we have can really make a bigger difference, to monetize that. And the reason exactly to monetize it is for exactly the reason you have. We need to hire people at some point. We need to have our own successors, right, in place. If you look at the journey, the three of us worked together at our last company, and we were there for 20 years. But we all had successors. We all promoted from within, grew people through the organization. And when we left, we handed it to that kind of homegrown new set of leadership. And that's exactly what we would want to do here. I'm a big believer in groups nurturing the talent that they have and giving people those opportunities. Everybody needs a chance to do something first. Right? Everybody was a first-time CEO. Everyone was a first-time manager. Everyone was a first-time lead. Everybody had to do something first. And if you create an organization where you're the place where people get to have those firsts, then you're an organization where people are dedicated, where people are loyal, where people can grow, and where the whole thing works. And so I think for us, that's the idea, right? We will at some point start, monetizing. But we don't want to ever monetize at the expense of the voters. If you look at some of the things you said, we'll never put ads in the app, never, because it takes away from the experience that the voter has. We would rather, do polling for $1 a week than we would to put an ad in the app. We would never sell data in such a way that, we would never sell data, period, right? I would say publishing a poll is different than selling data. I think there's a nuance there in terms of how you aggregate that information. So we would never sell data, but we would kind of put out those polls such that the whole thing can be funded and such that the whole thing can live forever. Because you're exactly right. Someday I'll get tired. Someday my founder will get tired, and we want this to live forever. And we want it to live forever, not in the hands of somebody that wants to do something different with it, in the hands of basically the people that it was built.
I might be interested in talking again as you move down this journey, because I'm really inspired what you're doing and interested in what you're doing. And as you continue to sort of sort that out and figure it out, it's sort of early, but at some point it gets too late to figure it out, right? At some point it's like, oh, I guess it kind of is what it is, and the decisions are made, and well, I'll move on and somebody else will do something and hopefully do something good with it. You said something a little bit ago. You said our target, we want to engage infrequent voters. I think that's your phrase. You may have said non-voters, may have said something else, but what I wrote down was infrequent voters. How do you do that? By that's kind of who you market your app to on paid Facebook ads, and how do you do that? Or do you use other methods to primarily, or at least put your emphasis on trying to engage less frequent voters?
Yes, there's a couple things. So one is, and it allows us to be super creative, which can be a lot of fun, is that infrequent voters are everywhere, right? So we know where, super voters are, right? Super voters are probably running, a local civic organization. They are, commenting on Twitter about every new political story that's out there.
Talking on some like podcast about democracy, something like that.
Exactly, right? Infrequent voters are everywhere, right? So, we are working on a partnership right now with somebody called Trek the Vote. And it is a group of people trying to just target Trekkies. Trekkies are Republicans, Trekkies are Democrats, Trekkies are young, Trekkies are old, Trekkies are all over the place, right? If you like Star Trek, you could be anybody. And chances,
to be clear, Star Trek itself is a socialist utopia. I mean, it is not
true.
ecumenical.
It is true, but I think there are some Trek nerds.
It's low key. They don't say those words.
No, they do not. But so there's Trek nerds out there of pretty much all political affiliations. And so we get to try to reach into different communities, right? So you can reach into, a poker playing community. You can reach into, we sometimes reach into nonprofits that are helping. We did a great pilot in 2022 with a nonprofit helping people get access to, CHIP, child's health care, or Medicaid. Well, those people are probably also infrequent voters, right? And so we can, help them, hey, solve your problem that you need around Medicaid, but hey, did you also know you have an election, right? Kind of go up there. And so we partner with a lot of different groups that are reaching very, very different constituencies in very, very different areas. And so we do the things that are atypical for politics. So politicians run ads on Facebook. We don't run ads on Facebook. Politicians send mailers. We don't send mailers, right? We try to reach people just very, very differently, because the people that are being reached by those tools are probably not the people that need us as much. They find us, they don't need us.
Do the three co-founders each own essentially a third of the company, or how does the ownership work?
Yep, exactly.
Got it. What do you see as you look at the landscape? Has there been anything? Well, actually, let's take it down from the whole landscape. Let's take it down to the ActiVote community landscape, right? The tens of thousands of people who participate regularly, the hundreds of thousands of people who participated at various times. Correct me if my numbers are wrong. What about that has surprised you? There might be things that have confirmed priors, and I'm interested in that, but anything particularly that surprised you?
One of the things that's been a really pleasant surprise, every once in a while we'll test out something new, right? We'll try something new. And so recently we put together a slightly longer piece of content. I think I mentioned earlier that we try to do like 2 to 5 minutes a day, so very short things. And so we experimented recently with a survey about energy independence, but there's a lot of facets of energy independence if you take that topic. And so that whole thing was about 12 minutes. And so we're like, let's put it out there and let's see if anybody does it, right? Are they totally disgusted because it's way too long? And hey, I showed up here for 2 minutes. 12 is not in my, too long, didn't read, and they, checked back out. Oh my gosh, overwhelming positive feedback. Everybody did it and they did the entire thing. And we even got emails saying, oh, please do more of this. We like to see how issues connect together as opposed to just asking about one thing or another thing. They absolutely loved it. Another huge surprise that we had, probably our biggest surprise. So at one point we decided, okay, we're going to incorporate legislation. So what is happening in all 50 state houses and Congress, right? And personalize that to show people what's happening. What are these elected officials actually voting on and what are they doing? And we thought no one is going to care about legislation. This feature is going to be not used. We're going to end up ripping it out. We thought it was important because that legislation rules our lives, right? It makes those decisions that we're going to do. Policy questions have always been the most popular thing. If somebody's daily policy question, they're like 95+% chance they're going to do that action. Bills was 86%. We were flabbergasted. We're like, people can't possibly like this as much as they do. So they like it a little less than the policy questions, but they engage with it almost as regularly. For us, that was encouraging, right? Because
help cure my ignorance. When you say, what's the difference between a policy question and a bill?
So a policy question, abortion is the policy question, right? So you just
got it.
A question about abortion. A bill would be, say, the Infrastructure Act, right? So here's what was in the Infrastructure Act. Here's how your representatives voted. How would you have voted on this bill? Or an upcoming continuing resolution that may or may not be introduced at some point in the next few weeks. We hope. How would you vote on that bill? And people engage with it more than we thought.
So you do this sort of step-by-step thing, right? At any point have you thought about helping people take a step once, what happens if you continue to build people's habits and you get more super voters? Do you then graduate out of ActiVote, or is there ActiVote Pro? Is there, this is what you do to receive action alerts or show up to not only answer policy questions, but to lobby upon them? Pick the thing that you want to do, and we give you a tool to do that. And, there've been various tools that have tried to do that. Maybe you could do it better. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so we do try to slowly kind of get people also into the real world and into their communities. So that could be, signing up for a discussion, right? So if somebody shows a lot of interest in environmental topics, I'd say, hey, there's a Braver Angels discussion happening next week on here. You can sign up and you could actually participate. You could talk about these issues with other people. And so again, that's something you can do from your own home, but it gets you out into the real world, talking to real people. One of the things we would love to do is to start to add kind of localized events that are happening. So it could be, your local neighborhood council, right? Hey, they're having a meeting on Tuesday night, just so you know, and then the neighborhood council, frequently is the ones going to town hall, to advocate, maybe you want to join. And I think that's one of our dreams is to exactly like graduate people into more and more in-person, in real life civic engagement activities, right? Outside of the app, but that we can at least notify them of. We're not there yet, but we want to go there.
Sara Gifford, Chief Operating Officer, co-founder of ActiVote, an app currently available on your smartphone app store. If you want to check it out for yourself, you can take your own survey, figure out where you plot out on their political values grid, matrix, scatter plot. Sara Gifford, thank you so much. Thanks for your time, and thank you for being a democracy nerd.
Thank you so much. I'm a proud democracy nerd.
Be well, Sara.
Take care.
Cheers.